All right, should we gather in? Um, some of you I've met. I'm Christian with CGF, and so we were just talking about access and the whole reason for this. So we've got this large roof with, let's just say, 1,500 lights, signage, and other things that have infrastructure routed throughout it. The bottom finish is the 3x6 lumber. That the typical attachment is 2 timber screws per end, which you can see up here. Some places you may have 4 if it's a cantilever piece out on the edge. The idea is that with this hinge, well, with multiples of these hinge, you can turn any area of the roof into an access point. So with the exception of, I can point it out to you later over there, there are, anywhere that you see a metal bracket at the bottom of the glue lamp that the lattice fastens through, that's a point that you're not supposed to take it off, because structurally it's part of the reinforcement of the bottom of the glue lamp. But that's only, I'll say, out of the 36,000 sticks, it's probably 0.1% of them. So for regular points of maintenance or things that you would need to access, you would either be in the penthouse where all the control panels are, or at the fixtures themselves. So ideally, you never have to, at some point you will, but for most regular business, you don't have to get above the lattice, which is good because the more times you take the lattice off and unscrew it, the more it kind of wears out the wood fibers, and then eventually you'll have to replace it with a longer screw or some other mechanical fastener. That part we can kind of talk about later. But if you have to get to a box or sprinkler head above it, most of those things are going to be at the roof deck above. So the girders are 6 feet deep, and the arch beam at the center tapers to 4 feet. So you have some distance that you have to scale that you'll need to get the bucket closer to. One of the recommendations we made a while back was for a specific type of JLG lift that has a long boom arm, because if you've seen the floor plans, you know that there's a lot of obstructions that are going to prevent you from getting, directly underneath. So because of that, we located most of the things that you might need to get to within the girder, because it's lower and tends to be clear below. But if you have to get to something that's high up over, say, the restrooms or the ATO or concessions, you're going to have to get that lateral boom arm out there and up. And so whenever you have to get to a place, you'll kind of have to make the determination, do I need 5 of these or do I need more, depending on the space in the lattice that you need to open up. How big of an access point do you need to get? So one of the big questions is, how many of these do you need? And that's kind of, we took a swag and said maybe 20, because maybe there's just a larger section that you have to get to. More?
Is the fundamental question, do we want that or just pull them down? Why don't we start?
Oh, for that? Yes. So, yeah. So, yes, if you have a place where you're just going up and you can get a lift underneath it, then you could probably, if you have a 10-foot bucket, you can have 2 people up there, unscrew both ends, and then just drop it down. I didn't bring, but we've shared in the past, these kind of access diagrams that break down the amount of area that you can get to with a typical scissor lift versus a boom arm. And I want to say that it's kind of 50-50. So you'll need these for probably 50% of the roof. And that's just again, I'd have to go back to the diagrams, but that's roughly what you would need to get to everywhere. And our goal was to evaluate whether or not you can get to it without building scaffolding to get to someplace. And I think there is only, the only place where, no, based on all the lift recommendations, you're able to get some type of lift to get to any part of the roof. So there, yeah,
You can drive the lift down there. You just potentially you'll have to put spreaders underneath the outriggers, particularly if you haven't extended all the way over one outrigger that's
yeah.
max load. But you can drive the biggest outrigger, biggest lift wherever. You just have to use spreaders when
Yeah.
you go to use them.
And there's a diagram that it probably needs to be updated, but KPFF has put that together so you know where you are in the airport, where you would have to use a spreader or not. So if you're on a mezzanine or anywhere in the western expansion, that slab is strong enough that you don't have to do that. If you're in the existing part of the building, then you have to be a little more careful about where you go. But as of right now, we don't have any zones that are like that you can't use it. It's really just, do I need a spreader or not? So that kind of comes back to, do you need this or not? So for argument's sake right now, let's just say that you would need this for half of the conditions. But that's not if, I was explaining there are 342 of those like custom circular fixtures. Those have downlights, uplights, and a ring light. To maintain those, you only need access to the penthouse or to the light itself, because you can pull out the up and down light without taking the fixture down. You can just swap it out. So that type of thing you don't need to get above the lattice. It's really only if you have to get to a J box. And there is, I don't think I mentioned this before, but you have the quick disconnects, but there's also a J box in the fixture itself, and the wires, the cabling and the wiring run down between the structural support lines as well. So the thinking is that unless there's some rare reason that you'd have a failure in there, you won't have to get to those boxes. From the sprinkler side of things, there's different periods of inspection. A lot of them you can do visual inspections of things from the ground. So you might need a little, monocular, but to look up at the heads. But in theory, if you had to clean the sprinkler head, you could also just dust it off with a pole as well. So, so for the hinge, once you've determined how many you need to take them down, what Brendan is going to show you here is that you can take a hinge, you clamp this side onto the side that's going to remain in place, this one on the one you want to remove. Once it's locked in, you back out the screws. Then you go to the other end of it, back out those screws and use the rope just to lower it down, and then rinse and repeat for however many you need to open. This is the closest to the final design. The only thing that's not accurate on here is this cam lock on here is just missing its slot. The idea is that there's one hinge design that you can use anywhere. So this is the flat lattice where it's just level. But even if you are at one of the domes or vaults and you have, kind of a different kind of adjustment, that cam lock on there will give you the range of adjustment you need so that you can use it anywhere. There are set pins that we have in top, so you can fasten those in and get some sort of kind of positive mechanical attachment there. And these will have kind of pads as well so that it doesn't damage the finished material. This right now is being designed for a 310-pound load. The longest lattice, I think, is 26 feet, which is going to be at the edge. It's probably rare that you would ever have to take that. The typical one is just under 10 feet and weighs 75 pounds. So the idea is if you're having to boom lift over something, it's one person in a bucket. One person can lower as many as you need. Any questions before we jump to the demonstration? Okay.
How many times did you practice with this, Brandon?
0. This is
Okay,
the first.
so hopefully it works out properly.
Yeah, our ZFAB.
CFAB was supposed to be here.
ZFAB was supposed to be here, but we got a COVID case, so.
This is the first.
Oh, and we're also planning to get like a tool dip the handle so it's not so sharp.
Messing around with this work, I tell you.
I think you got to. Are you going to take down that side? Yeah.
It looked right when I was standing looking down here, when I turned around.
We can do it that way.
So, instead of using an Allen, the vital, is there going to be a handle?
Well, what we did typically is, we have one of these on the screw gun, and then you just use that to drive it in and out. So yeah, it's always with the tool. And if anyone, we would encourage people who want to also get up and try it out if you want.
Yeah. What? You get 2 shots.
So one of the things that we don't have today, that we don't have fabricated, that's part of the design, is basically just a nylon leash that will go over it, so that it basically you could Velcro it, but you could also just drop a screw in the top. That way you don't have to worry about anything slipping or falling. We're just going to use, what's that?
On the hinge side?
On the side that you're going to lower. So Brendan's just going to use a rope today to drop it down. And that's typically what we used. And honestly, you could use that as well. It's just for safety, we thought that would be better.
It's a good thing you don't have to back the screw out all the way.
Right.
Just get it out of the beam.
Get out of the beam. Yeah. It's better if you don't only. So all of the fasteners that go in day one have at least 3 inches of embedment into the beam. If it's backed out, some yet to be determined number of times, you can just go with a longer screw. Up to, I think the typical screw now is about 8 5/8, and then I think they go up in 1-inch increments. So at the hinge that moves this is a Heim hinge. That piece of hardware actually has a 10,000 pound capacity, and we didn't get it for the capacity or for that weight. What we got it for is because it has this kind of lateral movement, so that if you have to lower it, the big lights are typically 10 feet below the flat lattice. So if you're at a vault or dome where you have a longer stick, maybe you have to move it around something. That high hinge allows you to swing it around. But then once it's down, it just hangs there. You open up it as many as you need to, get the bucket up, do your work, and then just close it back up again.
What's the space between the lattices? Is that about a foot?
A foot, yeah. So it's 2.5 by 5.5 inches, spaced 12 inches on center. And for the bigger bucket, or for the bigger lift, it's probably, the bucket's probably half that size. So
The procedure is you could probably like take the rope and throw it up and then tie it off. And
you
then
you
that
can,
way, but-
yeah.
Okay.
It kind of becomes I mean, obviously, if you're in the public area and you rope it off, you kind of have to manage that space. You could, I mentioned, I don't know if you were over here before, Sergio, but I was mentioning that the actual design has like a leash for each one
Okay.
that can attach to the end. We did a version where we actually had a pulley that would mount to the one next to it, but it kind of got to be too many pieces. So you could rig it off the edge. One of the simplest ways is if you had just like a belay pin that you could put it on the edge of the bucket, or you could also, well, in this zone you can loop it over the beam, but if you're in the wood section of the roof, you can't do that. You could use an adjacent lattice though. So the lattice is rated for 300 pounds. If you wanted to like put a platform on it, somebody technically could stand if you were tied off and met OSHA standards and all of that. It's not meant to be walked on, but you could do it. Yeah. Yeah, so kind of this is it in action. If there's anyone that wants to kind of get up and try it out, we would definitely encourage that.
Is that the final design with the two screws, or
Yes.
those, and the ones in the back were a preliminary design? Looks like there's one screw on this back too.
Oh,
Or
so there's an alternate fastener discussion going on because with timber screws, you can screw them in and out, but there's a limited amount of times that you can do that without stripping the fiber.
fiber out of it.
And it has different, there are many different variables to that. So we don't know how many times you can put it in and out.
Okay.
If there are areas that we know are going to be accessed more frequently, there's a different fastener on there that right now, I think the one that's in there basically has a fixed embed in the beam above. And it's basically just a bolt. Yeah. It's a machine thread.
Okay.
You can just back it out. And in that case, it's just a single one. We talked about doing that everywhere, but the cost was astronomical. So what we have an allowance for is 3% of the fasteners could be that alternate approach. The only places where we would anticipate any need for regular access is for, in the Oregon market, there's that custom light fixture with the arms that sweep over all the place. The drivers for that, we were limited by where we could put that, and those are just above the lattice in between the girder. And so, maybe the driver's good for 5 years, something, 5+ years. That would be the only place that we know of that would need regular access. Yeah.
I mean,